suitably refreshed, and welcome to panel 5. The theatre and its technology. Well, I hope we're in the right place. You guys know an awful lot about it, so hopefully we're going to have a great session here. Let's get straight on with the business of the day, and to our first speaker, Tony Lidington, who I think we first met 1,000 years ago, perhaps, almost, in Wakefield, when Tony was the chief exec at the Matcham wonderful Theatre Royal and Opera House in Wakefield. And he's gone on to do all sorts of different things, as you'll see in the biography. And in fact, I saw him last week on telly. Who do you think you are? I think it was, yeah. And he's always doing some fantastic stuff, and we're going to have a lovely session, I'm sure, with Tony. So, Tony, if you'd like to come and give us a first presentation, ladies and gentlemen.
Here we are again. Just by way of starting out, Promenade Promotions is the name of the company by which I earn the rest of my living when I'm not working for Exeter University, where I am now a lecturer, finally, after some time combining research and practical exploration of theatrical forms. And when people talk about the reimagining of historical performances, the conventional assumption is that such productions start with the text. But this hasn't been my starting point in the exploration of historical themes in theatre. My touchstones have been the art form, the architecture, and the technological techniques of the era. I've performed, directed, written and produced work in historical theatre spaces for almost all my 40 years of working professionally in the theatre industry. Sometimes this has been within conventional venues, as you can see here, such as Leeds City Varieties, where I directed my first pantomime in 1992, Wakefield Theatre Royal and Opera House, where I was the artistic director for 4 years, and the Theatre Royal Bury St Edmunds, whose stage I burned down during my technical rehearsal of Aladdin in 1998. That's another story, or possibly another panel. I've also created work in a myriad of non-conventional historical performance spaces, such as promenades and beaches, circus tents and marquees, village greens and streets, all of which have their own accretion of meaning over time, a patina of social engagement and interpretation which Mikhail Bakhtin calls heteroglossia. All my work attempts to explore how contemporary audiences can be engaged in these forms and the material that constitutes Britain's intangible cultural heritage, those aspects of our culture which audiences take for granted and are generally regarded as having little artistic merit, accruing little cultural value, yet embodying the core of British cultural identity. I have reimagined many art forms, such as music hall, concert party and sideshows, but in doing so, I've not tried to reproduce historical verisimilitude or museum-style authenticity. Instead, I've used my historically aware contemporary productions to examine why and how these art forms functioned so successfully and accessibly for so long, and how they continue to inform current practice. The historic venues where I have worked are implicitly imbued with historical resonance. The monarchical title of many such places, the reflections of social structures in the architecture and economic divisions of the auditoria, even the repeated architectural features of minarets, caryatids and cupids, classical motifs and Arcadian painting, these all combine to create a sense of an exoticized, historicized, timeless space. At the seaside, on a village green or in a forest, such timelessness exists in the natural landscape. In contemporary streets, it's necessary to build a temporary infrastructure to contain such timelessness, for example, a circus tent or a sideshow booth. But historical theatre venues are, at their core, like this one, a time machine, a portal to the world from which it was created, which is a veritable Aladdin's cave of possibilities, if only we worked with their natural, inherent architectural features, rather than trying to convert these spaces to a present for which they were never designed. I'm always dismayed when I watch a musical in an historic space and the sound emanates from a wall of black box loudspeakers beside or above the stage, whilst the actors are radio mic'd in order to compete with the sound of the amplified pit band, and the architectural features and delicate lines of moulding and painting are trashed by the brutality of scaff bars, bridge bars, and an array of moving lights. Lighting and sound are valuable technical components of modern stage shows, but only insofar as they augment the story and the whole experience of the theatrical event. This is not to say that I think we shouldn't be able to present contemporary shows, quite the opposite. I'd argue that we must create new material in our theatres, but ones which are responsive to the space, not in competition with it. Theatre has always been an immersive event, from storytelling around the campfire or a song given at a session in a pub to the phantasmagoria of the Georgian era. The atmosphere created by sound, vision, smell and touch have always been part of the way that we tell stories. And it's in this context that I want to talk about how architectural structures and stage machinery can promote understanding of past forms, processes and performance relationships through the fun and playfulness of an historical present. For 6 years, between 2010 and 2016, I created the Christmas pantomimes at Richmond's Georgian Theatre Royal, following the success of my previous productions there, most notably my adaptation of Grimaldi's memoirs entitled Joey, King of Clowns, and Dan Leno, the King's Jester. These are the posters from those shows. Richmond's Georgian Theatre Royal was built in 1788, so before the Victorian era, by the actor-manager Samuel Butler, whose family owned and operated a circuit of 5 theatres within 50 miles of Richmond in North Yorkshire. Performances in the venue had ceased in 1842, so we are in the Victorian era, but the integrity of the building was preserved through its use as a warehouse for corn, then furniture, then an auction room, and eventually a waste paper depot. After a fundraising campaign, it was officially reopened as a theatre again in 1963, following which there have been various further sympathetic renovations to highlight the historic features and comply with current health and safety legislation and to make it a viable space for contemporary public use. So this is the inside. As a result, this is, in the picture, is the most authentic surviving example of a public 18th century small-scale theatre. It houses the oldest complete set of painted scenery to survive in Britain, dating from 1836. Nowadays, it's an intimate 154-seat venue, although it had an original capacity of 450. The furthest seat is only 10.7 metres from the stage, the proscenium width just 4.5 metres wide, and it has a depth of 6.5 metres. It's almost like a full-sized Pollock's toy theatre. It is a truly unique venue for the production of work in the 21st century. From working in a range of historic theatres prior to the Georgian, I was already familiar with the kinds of usage restrictions that are placed on them to protect the heritage structures. However, over the course of a period of years, working regularly in the same space, I was able to gain the trust of the curators and guardians of the space so that I could push at the boundaries of what was permissible. I reintroduced techniques and skills that have been part of the historic repertoire for years, but have become obscured and undervalued in a world of modern technology, commercial imperatives, and heritage mollycoddle. This body of work questioned in practice what we mean by traditional, what is heritage, and how this connects to intangible cultural heritage. And in this way, the venue's conventional audience for contemporary pantomime became the unwitting collaborator in an ongoing experiment about the form and function of Victorian stagecraft and spectacle in the modern age. My work at Richmond started in 2005 when I presented Joey, King of Clowns, which was a staged version of my 4-part BBC Radio 4 series, which had been broadcast the previous year, entitled An Audience with Grimaldi, based on the memoirs of Grimaldi and edited by the young Charles Dickens, as we've heard of earlier, called Bonds. This is a picture of me when I was actually doing the radio broadcast. I believed in dressing up for the radio. My interest in this theme was centred around trying to trace the British clowning and comedy tradition in three parts, from what is generally taken to be the birth of modern clowning in Grimaldi up to the present day. As a practitioner who spent 25 years as an itinerant popular entertainer, I found so many practical similarities between the past and present lives of showmen such as Grimaldi that I felt it a valuable exercise to try and present a performance which used historical research and practice to tell a story that was contemporary in its relevance. I wanted to explore these themes by making use of the venue's remaining historical stage technologies and physical infrastructures, while at the same time revealing the ways in which such theatricality was achieved. Costume, makeup, scenic devices and audience relationships were all part of this mix and created a show which subsequently toured to other historic venues such as Blackpool Grand and Theatre Royal and Bury St Edmunds. I used the theatre's facsimile reproduction of the woodland scenery, the oldest surviving scenery I mentioned earlier, for the main backdrop, borders and slotted legs. There I am, on stage with the scenery behind us. However, we designed new slotted legs in order to make a transformation scene using the slots at the side of the stage into the vaulted Gothic dungeon, as Grimaldi described his incarceration for one of the final episodes of the piece. These were the Gothic scene when it was in place. The sprung trapdoor was brought into practical use, rather than merely a working museum piece for demonstration purposes, so that Joey could leap magically onto the stage. This had been rebuilt during earlier refurbishments, along with rising footlights, in order to show the ways in which theatrical devices had worked in the past, and was carefully researched from drawings such as these. It was identical to the counterweighted sprung trap that I'd used previously at Wakefield Theatre Royal, but this was its first use in a professional production at the Georgian. It took painstaking negotiations with the management about health and safety, as we've heard from a previous speaker, as well as care with regard to its role as part of the museum. But the result was spectacular and taught me a lot about the weighting, timing, and some of the difficulties associated with the use of such items, not least being the concentration, responsibility, and rehearsal required to make it work as part of the scene taking place above on the stage. Again, as someone brought up earlier. There's some pictures here. You can see if my little pointer's working. There we are. So this is the underside area of the stage with the working trapdoor on one side. There is one on the other, but they only have one mechanism there to swap between the two. That's a pantomimist about to get into the trapdoor. It's about to be loaded in. Each trapdoor is counterweighted for the weight of the individual going up and down, and that's me as Grimaldi springing up through the trap later in the show. Excuse me. The piece required me to undress from the Georgian gentlemen of Grimaldi's day-to-day existence and then make up and dress as clown on stage. In so doing, I revealed the layers of clothing required in this period, including right down to silk undergarments and the fleshings underneath, and then the complexities of assuming the clown's attire. That's me when I'm in Grimaldi in his day-to-day dress, and hopefully there's me as Grimaldi. Props on the stage were repurposed as extravagant, animated transformations, just as Grimaldi had done in his own Harlequins. Now you can see Harlequin dressed as the Hussar, and then myself trying to do something vaguely similar in the Georgian, wearing the box that I was lying on earlier. I used Grimaldi's original catchphrase and comic songs, together with audience participation, to try and involve them in his character and story, and in order to draw parallels with more contemporary comedians. It was this relationship with the audience that was perhaps most revealing in terms of the way in which the theatre structure impacted upon the performance. The simple proscenium is located beside two side doors on the forestage, surmounted by balconies, or what at the Georgian are known as the Juliet boxes. So here you should be able to see, we're looking from the auditorium here. So here you can see the stage. This is one of the boxes of the Georgian box that's actually on the stage. And high up above on the stage, there's a Juliet box here, that's what they call them there, and here is the the entrance onto the stage through the side door, and that's matched on the other side. And here you can see it being used in an engraving from the same period, a different theatre obviously. Beside the proscenium doors are stage boxes, with members of the audience effectively sat beside and on the stage itself. As a performer, it's impossible to ignore this proximity, or at least to do so would be an active and deliberate denial of the fact that the same visual sphere is occupied by both the audience and the performed action. As is true in almost all al fresco performance, the active involvement of the observer with the observed is intrinsic to the form itself, and the Georgian Theatre Royal made no attempt to deny the social stratifications of public space in the construction of the performance venue itself. So here's some performances taking place that we were doing. That's me on stage with my double act partner. You see how tiny the audience is, but right next to it, we're right on top of the audience here. There's no distance at all. And here you can see my baddie in, I think it's Jack and the Beanstalk, with her foot right up in the face of the audience member who's sitting in that box. As a result, the performances that take place in these spaces cannot ignore this active relationship, and in so doing, it affects the acting style and practices. Smaller Victorian theatres and illegitimate performance forms, such as those presented in the streets, fairgrounds, music halls, peep shows, and phantasmagoria, consciously engage directly with their audience as active participants in the action and the construction of the narrative. So although 19th century spectacular dramas in the larger theatres increasingly immersed their audiences in a vision of verisimilitude contained within the proscenium arch, the principal consequence of the earlier interactive relationship between actors and spectators was that both are simultaneously required to be within and outside the performance. Artifice, or theatricality, was therefore integral to the experience of theatre going. I was able to explore further aspects of the way in which theatrical machinery and audience relationships intertwined in my next project, and it was the second in my trilogy of British clowning. It was another one-man show, this time about Dan Leno, entitled The King's Jester. This originated as a 5-part BBC Radio 4 series, and it was broadcast in 2006. It was the biographical retelling of Dan's life, and in this production, I was able to tell the story of the rise of music hall, stand-up comedy, and the role of the Dane in pantomime. All aspects of British 19th century performance which drew on the direct stage and audience relationship. And instead of touring the woodland scenery of the 1830s, as I had for Joey, a key component of the set was a bespoke, full-sized, moving panorama backdrop, which was wound across from one side of the stage to the other to depict different parts of Dan's life. So here we've got, that's the actual painting, the design painting of the drawing that was done, and this is it in the workshop being created. It's on a farm somewhere near Ripon. I seem to remember it's absolutely freezing cold in there. So that was the mechanism that we created to be able to do it. And this was inspired, this idea of having the moving panorama was inspired in part by my desire to explore Victorian scenic effects, but also my research into Dan's personal life, which had revealed his interest in painting and his painting of a panorama in his later life. That's the panorama when it was finished on the stage, with me pointing out some various aspects of it. That moved across the stage with elements of his life. And here is one of the paintings with Dan in front of it, which is one he's actually painted there with all his kit. The show opened at Richmond and then toured to a wider range of venues than we had with Joey, including some less historical theatre spaces, such as the Lawrence Battery in Huddersfield, the Square Chapel in Halifax, and the Stephen Joseph in Scarborough. In view of this, we toured a replica of the proscenium, borders and portals, plus a set of shell-framed footlights to recreate the theatrical space. Once again, the house lights were left half up to maintain the direct audience-actor relationship throughout. You can see here, that's actually at Exeter University, the first one on your left. We're setting it up to make it look like a Victorian theatre, and there it is once it's been set up, and then in performance it looked like that. These two touring productions, which had utilised the theatrical technologies and actor-audience proxemics and dynamics I found at Richmond Georgian Theatre Royal, led to my next series of experiments over the 6 consecutive festive seasons. The active engagement with audience and use of scenic machinery which I'd employed to such effect in Joey and Dan were eminently suited to the kind of involvement and delight in theatricality that is implicit in pantomime. I produced pantomimes in a variety of theatrical spaces, but at Richmond there was the opportunity to explore the entire palette of theatrical possibilities that I'd started to investigate with my 2 previous solo shows. Not by presenting historical biography, but rather by creating accessible, historicised entertainments which could address contemporary issues for a modern, cross-generational audience. According to Simon Sladen, the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Theatre and Performance at the Victorian Albert Museum, each year the pantomime industry still accounts for 20% of the audience attending live performance in the UK, whose numbers in 2015 exceeded 3 million, with box office takings that year of £58.6 million. Pantomime is still the first live theatrical experience for many young people, alongside Punch and Judy. And for most venues, the annual pantomime is a commercial cash cow that helps to support the rest of the theatre's programme. The key to any successful pantomime is in providing accessible, fun entertainment during the festive season which can appeal to all 3 generations: children, parents and grandparents. In modern times, pantomime is regarded as seasonal, although the recent tour of Sir Ian Macmillan's Mother Goose has started to question this assumption once again. And of course it's thought to be quintessentially British. Like other popular forms such as seaside entertainment, music hall, blackface minstrelsy and fairground sideshows, pantomime's roots are in a variety of global forms, and the art form uses every possible aspect of production, including spectacle, costume, illusion, music, song and dance, technology, acrobatics, comedy, slapstick, tragedy and romance. It's a veritable smorgasbord of theatricality. However, at its core is the open and interactive relationship with its audience, which generates a familiar and indeed familial feel to the proceedings. It was this aspect of pantomimes that I tried to express in the 6 years of Christmas pantomimes I wrote and directed in the venue, bringing my research of Georgian and Victorian theatrical technologies and performative techniques into practical implementation for a contemporary audience. As each year evolved, I was able to become increasingly ambitious with the possibilities of staging work in the same space. In so doing, the reputation for high-quality, historically based pantomime productions at the Georgian Theatre Royal increased year on year, as did their box office takings. The most popular fairy tale and folklore titles of pantomime are familiar to everyone, and they each have an historical resonance. My first pantomime at the Georgian was Mother Goose, which has been part of the British pantomime repertoire since 1806. Adult audiences come to the annual pantomime with an understanding, or at least an expectation, of what story will unfold. In my experience, the fundamental structure of these tales requires little change to fulfil these expectations, as they are robust and succinct, honed by repetition over many generations. However, there is room for aesthetic manoeuvre in the ways that these familiar yarns are told, and this is where my practical research could be applied. My starting point was that we should use the fabric of the building, around and beyond the stage itself, as the playboard for our storytelling. I encouraged the actors to clamber up and around the sides of the boxes, improvising exchanges with the audience as they gripped onto them for stability. The audience remained visible throughout all these productions. To a certain extent, the light spill from the stage into such a small auditorium made this impossible to avoid, but I was happy to accept such reflected light and encouraged my pantomimists to engage directly with members of the audience, both from the stage and also to feel able to enter the auditorium as part of the action. In this way, the architecture of the building itself became not only a pretty dressing for the family outing, but an integral part of the action of the show. As a regular feature, I involved the audience in a finale to defeat the baddie with a knitted rock fight. Yes. At the climax of the show, the stewards would hand out missiles, which had been hand-knitted by followers and friends of the theatre, drawing on the loyalty of their heritage volunteers from all around the world. These missiles were themed for each show. So here, bananas for Sinbad, snowballs for babes in the wood, fairy cakes for Puss in Boots, and on a cue from the stage, the whole audience would pelt the stage with thousands of hand-knitted items. Music was all played acoustically from the pit in front of the stage. We didn't obscure the players from view, but rather encouraged the musicians to play their instruments in full view of the audience. This is a shot from the pit looking up, and those are the musicians, and just on the other side of them are the audience. And there's some of them performing on the stage as well. I used to get them up on stage to perform too. We didn't use radio mics or click tracks to amplify voices for songs, but as would have been done in former times, we used more sympathetic percussion such as surdos, djembes, skull blocks and doll drums, combined with bass riffs from a tuba or trombone. This meant that the usual contemporary pantomime musical fare of synthesizer plus kick drum or drum machine were replaced by a sound that was both orally and visually sympathetic. The band were lit rather than hidden away, and their interaction with those on stage to create an acoustic oral soundtrack to the action, rather like in Peking opera, melodrama, or the European pantomime, proved an essential part of each production. Historical technical stagecraft was invaluable to the creation of effects in that space, such as learning how best to use tripling and kabuki cloths for a venue which has only got a half fly tower, discovering how using cut cloths with gauzes provided opportunities for shadow play and projections, how to negotiate the use of non-pyrotechnic devices to give the necessary pop and flash for the immortals' entrances and exits. We used both of the existing trapdoor spaces, as you've seen, under the stage, shifting the mechanism from one side to the other for variety over different years, and we built puppet portals into the side doors of the theatre, and even rigged trapezes above the stage. Here you can see the monkey in Sinbad swinging above the stage. There we are. So Jack and the Beanstalk got a doubles on silks, and in the finale, our baddie was twirled upside down on a rope playing a saxophone. Because I could. Many of the key pantomimists in the Georgian and Victorian eras had been skilled tumblers, as well as bringing individual variety and circus-based skills to their roles. And as I'm sure you know, the Harlequin aid, which existed throughout the 19th century as a feature within the pantomime, even during the era of the spectaculars and the importation of musical acts, had its roots in the knockabout slapstick comedy of pantomime's earliest European origins of the commedia dell'arte. And I too used acrobats. As a regular feature of my pantomimes at the Georgian, I always tried to include these acrobatic and variety skills, so I was keen to recruit artists who could act, sing, dance, relate to an audience, as well as offer a specialist skill, and preferably able to play a musical instrument as well. I generally found these performers from folk who had backgrounds in circus, street theatre, and TIE, rather than actors with a profile in spotlight. The Georgian didn't generate its audiences through the employment of star names, but rather because of its connection with theatrical heritage, the prettiness of the auditorium, and the skills of its pantomimists. Speciality or special acts such as ventriloquism, magic or illusion became a feature of our shows, using ancient legerdemain and misdirection to create moments of surprise and wonder, and even horror, when chopping someone in half. Puppets, small and large, enabled me to play with scale, as did the use of skin parts, and even on occasion real animals, on a stage playing area that measured just 12 foot wide by 20 foot deep. Inspired by the spirit and tradition of the historical forms I was in the process of exploring, I tried to push at the boundaries of themes and ideas of the modern world. In the pit, as I've said, all sounds were acoustically produced and in full view of the audience. But alongside more traditional instruments, we used a theremin, with the MD wearing white gloves in UV light during the spooky fairground scene in Jack and the Beanstalk. And I had battery-operated drills at different pitches in the pit, and they were used to accompany each step of the moon robots in Puss in Boots. Perhaps most ambitiously of all, in the same pantomime in 2014, we were the first venue in Britain to fly a remote-controlled drone over the heads of the audience, operated from the stage, as the baddie, Monsieur Santo, escaped to his moon base lair. And I suspect that we were also the last theatre that was allowed to do it, because shortly afterwards it was banned, the flying of drones in public space. Theatres can indeed be dangerous. Throughout its history, the complexity and fluidity of the pantomime form has allowed the exploration of contemporary themes in their content and imagery. Whether that be Joey Grimaldi lampooning the Hussars costume as you saw in 1812 in Harlequin and the Red Dwarf, or during the Boer War in the 1899 Drury Lane production with Dan Leno of Jack and the Beanstalk, making the ogre giant Blunderbore instead of Blunderbore, or ridiculing accessible, easy political targets such as Boris Johnson or the latest tax cuts. A greater challenge for me was to address some of the more contentious political issues through a progressive lens, without offending the mainstream cross-generational public, especially bearing in mind that the local visiting MPs during my tenure at Richmond's Georgian Theatre Royal was firstly William Hague, and secondly, Rishi Sunak. In several of these shows, we overtly played with the gender fluidity of the conventional story and allowed for every possible combination of love interest. I was keen to retain the cross-dressing of the dame and principal boy, but without descending into trite, grotesque parodies of womanhood or sexualised, thigh-slapping kitsch of the feminised hero. My dames were earthy but honest, the heart of the pantomime and the confidant of the audience. Macmillan's recent Mother Goose captured this essence rather well, I thought. Whilst my principal boys were proactive, not reactive, assertive, and not compliant. In Puss in Boots, the central theme was how the wicked villain Monsanto had developed a genetically modified corn, which resulted in the talking cat. Jack and the Beanstalk was the most ambitious of all these themes. It overtly explored the meaning of fear and the social construction of what makes a monster. Ultimately, it was a text about mental health and self-worth through the medium of pantomime, circus, and slapstick comedy for all the family. Over my 10 years of developing work at the Georgian, its annual pantomimes became the highlight of the theatre's year, and by my final year, we'd increased box office sales from the first production of Mother Goose by 83%. As is true for many other in-house pantomime productions, these shows represented a major financial and artistic commitment from the management to a run that was at least 4 times longer than for any other production in their programme year. Our pantomimes for the Georgian attracted acclaim from critics and audiences alike, gaining a national reputation for historical accuracy, contemporary relevance, and ambition. In 2016, Jack and the Beanstalk broke the box office records as the highest-selling pantomime in the theatre's history and was named the #1 must-see pantomime in Britain by the Sunday Telegraph. Hooray, I think. These shows have become noted productions amongst an array of much more lavish Christmas shows in the north of England. The scale of the venue and the amount of money available for production costs meant that we had to compete in other ways. We may not have had the wealthy reserves or large capacity auditoria by which other venues could amortise the costs of production. However, we had unique historical riches, which could be unlocked through an understanding of the form, the architecture, the technologies, and the relationship with audience. These lay like an unopened cultural time capsule, ready to be revived, resurrected, and reimagined. Pantomime productions often use the term traditional in their publicity, with little awareness of the conventions or legacies of the art form that they purport to represent. I would contend that it is only through understanding the historical practices and infrastructures which underpin the form that the potency and wonderful theatricality of heritage performance can be shared with a contemporary audience. Authenticity and integrity are at the core of all good pantomimes, now as ever. After these years, I felt I'd explored most of the themes and possibilities offered by the venue. I also had a young family and decided to move to the southwest of England to be nearer to the grandparents. I never completed my trilogy at British Clown. The Grimaldi and Dan Leno shows were just the first 2 elements, so if anyone out there would like to commission the 3rd element about Max Wall in a historical venue, then I'm here afterwards. I continue to work in the same sphere, researching historical popular entertainment forms and their application to contemporary contexts. I now teach popular entertainment as well in the drama department at the University of Exeter, and in the summer season I run an apprenticeship scheme for for emerging young artists in seaside performance. I've written my first monograph for Routledge about the history of Pyrrha troops and concert parties, available in all good bookshops, plugged nearly over. I perform my own flea circus, the inimitable Uncle Tacker. And I tour a Georgian peep show at events around the country. That's me with my peep show in Richmond. And I've got several pictures of them here. The one, if I go back one, that's a picture of the inside based on a Georgian theatre inside the box that I'm carting along there. It's lit by lithium batteries, so it can be done absolutely anywhere. This is inside the Georgian Theatre Royal. So it's a peep box in a miniature theatre. And this picture here, looking through the peephole at the back of the boxes at the miniature theatre where people are looking into a peep box watching miniature theatre. However, despite all this other work, I remain particularly proud of the body of work at the Georgian, where research into the fun and mechanics of historical architecture, technology, and their practical implementation played out for a contemporary audience. And in the process, we managed to create accessible, progressive entertainment for the present, which resonated with Harlequin's past and offers a portal to the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. What a wonderful paper to have to show the context of heritage performance and its relevance today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we now move on to the next paper, which was to be given by David Mayer and his wife Helen. Sadly, David passed away two weeks ago, and unfortunately, therefore, Helen has decided that she can't come to join us this week. However, I've been asked to give the paper on their behalf, and Philip Carley, who is with us today, who we all know, has agreed to provide the accompaniment to the silent films that they wanted to show. So, if you'd like to come up and join me, Philip. Round of applause. So, we can detect method in our host's decision to cite this conference in a Tyne Theatre and Opera House. Because it reminds us, theatre historians all, that every one of the 19th century plays that we've read, and is likely to be mentioned in the next few days, was performed in a theatre such as this, and now a rarity. A wood and hemp theatre, a wooden stage perforated with traps, counterweighted and controlled by hemp rope, similarly perforated with strategically placed slopes, and again controlled by hemps, and beneath the stage wooden machinery which helped to produce the illusions for which such wood and hemp theatres were famous. And then, above the stage, a labour-intensive, elaborate flying system for flown scenery, again managed by skilled stagehands, and again controlled by hemp ropes and judicious counterweights. But today, there's a problem. We can read about these stages and gaze at the illustrations in such important and valuable books as Georges Molinet's Troquet Décor, or Richard Sutton's Changeable Scenery, but we are severely restricted in our ability to restage and to actually witness the range of effects and illusions once deployed in these now rare wood and hemp theatres. Early films give us that privilege, and we're offering this paper as a tribute to David Wilmore. So here's where our work begins. For about 40 years, since the 1980s, we've been examining what you likely call silent film, that is, motion pictures made in the decades between the late 1890s and 1928, the so-called silent era, because we found that these early films were frequently made by people whose earlier professional background was the theatre and who, making their films, frequently relied on theatre technology, theatre illusions, theatrical techniques, theatre acting, and the theatrical repertoire itself, but who continue to use wood and hemp theatres as the place to place their actors and, significantly, their cameras. The two films we're about to screen were made in two such theatres, both built with wooden stages and machinery and hemp rope rigging, and both built with glass roof stages which allowed adequate natural daylight, neither theatre studio for any theatrical purpose, but specifically as sites to make movies. You'll recognise the name of the first filmmaker, Georges Méliès, a conjurer and illusionist who in 1896 rebuilt and greatly enlarged his small Paris wooden hemp theatre in the nearby suburb of Montreux, so that he could make the films for which you may know him, Méliès' Faust or Enfer, dating from 1903, which runs for a brief 7 minutes, is the first of these we'll screen, and it depicts hell as a rather jolly place, apart from the fiery torments that await such sinners as Faust. You are less likely to recognise the name of Albert Capellani, the director of our second film, Le Pied du Mouton, unless you are intimately familiar with the naturalist theatre of André Antoine. But this is 1907, and in 1905, the Capellani building with his glass roof and wood hemp theatre site had left Antoine to become a filmmaker for Pathé. And this film is a 14-minute Christmas pantomime shot in Paris, but targeted at English audiences in English music halls and given an English title, The Talisman. I will explain a little about Faust Enfer in advance of your viewing to avoid speaking over Philip Carley's excellent accompaniment. You will see various tramps, slow and corner in action. You will see waterfalls created by agitating semi-translucent scrims, and you'll see Mephistopheles and Faust drop deep into hell. An effect made by suspending them in harness from the flies, whilst the backcloth is drawn upward behind them. But earlier there will be a moment when the camera appears to be taking you sideways, deep into hell, over jagged stalagmites and beneath sharp stalactites. This is the famous but rarely seen sink and rise effect, possibly only in such wooden theatres as the one we now occupy. Rows of profile scenery on slopes sinking beneath the stage as matching painted backcloths are simultaneously drawn upward. You will also see a primitive early film effect, mostly achieved by stopping the camera and substituting an object for an actor. A rag dummy replacing the living Faust, who Mephistopheles, bored with taking his prize victim on a tour of the underworld, pitilessly hurls into the deepest fiery abyss of hell. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now show, accompanied by Philip Carley, Faust or Enfer. In 1901, English and Scottish music halls and variety houses made a major and far-reaching change to their bills. Hitherto, the halls and variety palaces had only offered bills of live acts with live entertainers, but from that date they dropped some of the live acts in favour of an interval of motion pictures. Audiences in the music halls could now expect a full half hour of films, usually an assortment of short films spliced together on a single reel. In 1901, films were very much a novelty which drew audiences, and significantly, films sold by the linear foot and hand-tinted with stencil-applied colouring was considerably cheaper than engaging live acts. However, in 1901, the British film industry was still in its infancy, but across the Channel, the French were quick to see an opportunity. Realising that the British music halls had no permanent performers and were unable to mount a full production of a play or pantomime, the two major French film companies, Pathé and Gaumont, already international commercial successes, gambled that they could produce elaborate Christmas pantomimes that the British halls would snap up and feature in their half hour of holiday films. And that's what we're viewing as we watch Le Pied du Mouton, a 1907 pantomime party partly blended with the standard French fairy play, but aimed primarily at UK audiences. Its characteristics demonstrate Albert Capellani's adherence to standard 19th century British pantomime structure and his singular, startling deviation from it. It begins, typically enough, with a young couple whose marriage is opposed by their tyrannical father and who favours a fool as her husband. Her suitor attempts suicide, but is prevented by a benevolent agent, a fairy, who, materialising from an oak, creates the magical talisman that will protect their courtship. And that talisman, the deviation, not Harlequin's bat, the conventional gift of the benevolent agent, but here, a magical roast leg of lamb. The couple, father and fool, progress through a series of scenes, reminiscent of the Harlequin age, remarkable for their stage effects under the obligatory dark scene, where the lover loses control of his magic leg of lamb, giving temporary power to the fool until the benevolent agent restores harmony and brings the couple together in an apotheosis finale. It's a remarkable film pantomime, probably the best we've seen. Now, once again, I want to avoid speaking over Philip's playing, so I will briefly draw your attention to the effects in the woodland scene where a large head comes trundling down a forest path. Please watch the immediate foreground. A sprite will erupt from the head and disappear down a vampire trap. A second sprite will emerge from a star trap, stage right, and apparently disappear down a second star trap, stage left. The latter effect possible only because Capellani's camera has been reversed. Ladies and gentlemen, Le Pied du Mouton, played and accompanied by Philip Carley. David, this is for you. conclusion, you have been viewing 2 dramas filmed on 2 wood and hemp stages. You haven't seen backstage or beneath the stage to see how the many effects were managed, but you've seen the possibilities and versatility of the Victorian wooden stage, and now have a better appreciation of what has been preserved and remains possible beneath this very roof. Film, in some instances stigmatised as a destroyer of theatre, has also proved a preserver of theatre. We are grateful that these examples survive to evidence the wooden stage's versatility and imaginative possibilities. And so moving on quickly, Maeckelbergh, frankly, needs no introduction. Michael and I have known each other for many, many years, and you are going to have a fantastic presentation. I know it. Ladies and gentlemen, Professor Maeckelbergh.
I'll try and live up to the billing. Well, those of you who know me will know I've been obsessed for years with the King's Theatre in one form or another. This is yet just another manifestation of the same, disease maybe. Unlike, as Tony has mentioned, the business of even having a sort of piece of fabric. If I had a piece of fabric for the building, I would feel fulfilled. We have the commercial opera arcade left, and that's it. I'm going off-piste from my abstract mainly because the lots mentioned in the abstract have proved less helpful, not because they're any vaguer than they were when I started. It's just that while I can identify things, we don't have the actual objects, and so it became a sort of slightly less profitable approach as I went on. Most of what I'm going to say will be confirmatory rather than revelatory, but thereby offering us comfort, answering questions which I have, the must-have questions I've had for quite some time, such as there must have been a room for the soldiers, there must have been a room for the spare musical instruments, etc. You do have a handout. I note that this is the only one so far in the conference, much to my astonishment. I don't object, I don't apologise for being old-fashioned. You've got some coloured pictures anyway to at least brighten it. But the thing is that it contains lists and statistics which are not useful really seen on the screen, and I would prefer that you were able to browse through them in your own time rather than trying to watch it quickly as I flash past. There is an execution in Her Majesty's Theatre, the Opera House. In a few days' time, everything is to be sold by auction. Sceneries, properties, chandeliers, library of music, in fact, everything that can be carried away. The executioner here was the auctioneer James Scott, who on 17 March 1853 was slated to offer the theatre's contents to be sold on the premises. The motivation for the sale was money, or at least a substantial lack thereof, caused by poor or at least over-ambitious programming, a lack of administrative skill, and the shortage of the required guile required to run the theatre. These failings were responsible for the financial disasters which had regularly engulfed the institution for much of its existence, and on this occasion it was the calling in of a loan of £10,000 advanced to the theatre's management by the owners of the ground. As unfortunate as this turn of events was, Scott's substantial sale catalogue offers us an extraordinarily detailed glimpse into the organisation and contents of production spaces in the London Opera House. The catalogue is organised by room and function and contains previously unknown and in some cases unexpected information about the layout of the theatre, of which we know little. We find not only listed sets, machinery and costumes, but the contents of the vaults, soldiers' rooms, boxes, offices and committee rooms and other spaces in the sprawling building. The lot descriptions are mostly in list form, but every now and again the auctioneer has allowed his evaluative skills to shine through. We read of a well-made and well-made ebonised frame easy chair, a capital knee-hole writing table, and a finely carved and gilt old French pier table with a marble slab. surprisingly in Her Majesty's box. And some of the lots now seem unintentionally humorous. What are we to make of Lot 59? A girandole, a hookah, listed in the concert room. Or in Lot 114, a boa constrictor, snake, 2 imitation books and a furnace. Or Lot 95, 78 pairs of skates. But first some context. Her Majesty's Theatre is the forerunner of the current Her Majesty's in the Haymarket. It had been built as the Queen's Theatre in 1705, known as the King's Theatre much of its life, and had the accession of Queen Victoria in 1837 permanently took on its current name. In 1853, the theatre's auditorium looked as shown here, a space which had been built in 1791 to replace that destroyed by fire in 1789. It had a concert room added to it in 1794, which seems to have been very grandly decorated, but it was sparsely furnished and never seems to have reached its full potential. The outside, however, was not complete. The money ran out, and the theatre looked as seen here for 25 years until it was encased by John Nash as part of the Regent Street scheme. For much of its life, the theatre's programmes had consisted of a single opera and some dances. As in the 18th century wore on, the dances turned into ballet d'action and then to what we would recognise as ballet, with the addition of some extra musical events throughout the programme. The theatre's repertory and its vocal personnel was largely Italian. The ballet dancers were largely French, dancing French works, and this exotic approach built into each season's extra costs for importing just about every performer involved, plus extra salaries for the stars. It also added to the stresses and difficulties in managing performers. The financial situation with the opera, just one slide ahead of myself. The financial situation with the opera, as that we find in 1853, was due to the manager of this opera during the 40s and 50s, Benjamin Lumley. Lumley, who had trained as a solicitor and was later to write a fantasy novel about living in another world, had been providing legal advice to the previous manager of Her Majesty's, Pierre Laporte, and had become familiar with the theatre. When Laporte died in 1841, the opera company felt that he was a man who had the experience to take over the running. However, his lack of diplomacy and general cavalier attitude toward running a theatrical enterprise saw the departure in 1846 of the opera's conductor Michael Costa, who left with most of the singers and the orchestra at the end to found a rival opera company at Covent Garden, which had been forced into difficulties as the effects of the 1844 Act took hold. Covent Garden was then restyled the Italian Opera House with a newly created auditorium designed by Benedetto Albano, reopened on 6th of April 1846 with Rossini's Semiramis. In turn, Lumley vigorously promoted and developed Her Majesty's, which prospered mainly through his discovery and promotion of the soprano Jenny Lind and a vigorous publicity campaign to promote the season. The competition between the two of them was fierce, and the situation was completely unnecessary. Further, given that London had scarcely been able to support a single opera house since the arrival of Italian opera in 1705, it is remarkable that both companies lasted as long as they did. And on top of all the usual strains of running an opera season, there was still the under-researched Paris enterprise, in which Lumley had attempted to run the Italian opera in Paris in conjunction with the King's Theatre, sharing casts and productions. Lumley, whose time and money were squandered on these arrangements, referred to it frequently as his Paris venture. But the venture, which sounds an attractive piece of cooperation, not only consumed Lumley's time and money, but it also sapped the fortunes of Her Majesty's, which then collapsed. And it became clear in the season of 1852 that things could not continue. Lumley, who was never a man without a scheme, was uniquely placed for the immediate task ahead. He came with a number of financial and administrative proposals to rescue the situation, none of which was ultimately successful. The reasons for the failure are multifarious, but central to the problem was the fact that the Limited Liability Act, a piece of legislation which was only being discussed, was not passed until 1855. In the face of these failures, the creditors then closed in. As the handout shows, the catalogue is arranged room by room. This is the first 3 pages of the list. There is no other listing of the rooms in this building, at least that I can find, and Scott's catalogue appears to be the only record of their existence. Unfortunately, also there's no more than a ground plan of the theatre. This is an undated one, but all the ones I've seen are the same as this, and they really all are originated in the plans drawn up by Decimus Burton for the recasing of the theatre, which was completed in about 1820. We can see on this plan the auditorium, the concert room, and the stage area clearly marked, the ground floor circulation spaces including the grand salon, the green room, the dressing room, and the musicians' room, all of which can be found at this level. It's clear from the listing of the contents that some rooms, although with declared purposes, were being used for storage. The concert room, for example, seems to be partly filled with lumber and extra items such as Roman swords, sabres, a cheval glass, 84 guns, brackets various, 100 tin shields, and 27 tin speaking trumpets. But it is the case that the workrooms and administrative offices largely have items relevant to their listed use, as the last example on your handout, which shows the entry for the armoury, which I think is probably the best organised room in the building. As the centrefold of the handout shows, when lotted up, there were 1,553 lots. There was also a group of what we might call star lots, that is, the lots to which an auctioneer wishes to draw attention and which they believe will bring the largest prices. These are set in capitals and in some cases have longer descriptions. There is an immense amount of scenery in store, both in the theatre and at the barn around the corner in James Street. Not only are there several hundred lots devoted to it, but these lots contain many pieces, and often pieces which grouped together which belong to one show. About a fifth of what is listed can be linked to a particular work, one of which for me certainly stands out, which is lot 92, which consists of 6 pieces of the Sonambular mill scene, water wheel, 13-step ladder, 10-step ditto, 3 platforms, 3 uprights, a handrail, and 2 frames, all part of the same piece of set. An elaborate piece to be sure, but it required extra pieces to make it work. There are scenes which are specific but without ascribed to a work, a Venetian palazzo, a Spanish street, and the port of Palermo, and there are the expected more anonymous stock scenes such as a group of grave scenes, a mill, and a set of cloisters. Show unspecified, but I think these are likely to be the cloisters from Robert le Diable. I'm going to look at 3 samples of the sort of detail that emerges from this listing. The model room, the Grand National Concerts, and what the listing tells us about the opera chorus. The model room was located next to 2 painting lofts. Its contents are various, but are only made up of 13 lots. Most of these are cut-offs of material for different projects, or simply items stored there, such as the pair of large blue damask curtains for The Prodigal in lot 39, or 5 music stands in lot 30. But more interesting are the listings of an expensive model of the theatre, scale 1 inch to the foot and 10 feet high, and a similar one, scale 1/4 to the inch to the foot. It seems possible that the smaller one of these is the model for the theatre made by Dayton for Benjamin Lumley, who loaned it to the Great Exhibition in 1851. On 9 May 1851, the Standard reported that there had been a private view of a very beautiful model of Her Majesty's Theatre at the residence of Mr. Dayton, College Street, Westminster. The model was only complete yesterday afternoon and was forwarded to the exhibition this morning. The representative of the theatre is viewed from the stage, and nothing can be more striking than the facsimile of that graceful interior. The practised eye can recognise almost every box, so accurate has been the scale, so complete the embodiment. One seems, in fact, to see the theatre in every part of a diminishing microscope. By 19 May, the model was listed by the Morning Post as being on display with other architectural models in the nave of the Crystal Palace. This is what you're seeing here, is the nave of the Crystal Palace with the architectural models on show. I can't yet identify the one of the theatre. If anybody has any luck, that's great. All of you will know that the Crystal Palace and the exhibition was endlessly reproduced in these fabulous colour pictures, and also a lot of Le Bon, the prints and so on. And this is the only one that I can actually find that shows the architectural models on display as opposed to all the other artworks. Also on display was this testimonial, which was also shown at the Great Exhibition from Lumley's friends and supporters, made by the Royal Warren Silversmiths, Hunt and Roskell, promoting themselves, Lumley and the Opera House. But interesting and more relevant for us is a third lot, described as a quantity of models, suggesting that the scent painters used these for preparation, and they're clearly what's being described as working maquettes. Buried away in the second day's listing, which consisted of part of the gentleman's wardrobe, is a lot listed as ornaments for national concerts. Well, on the fourth day, the staging for the concerts appeared in lot 20. A very large quantity of well-seasoned timber to form an orchestra, covering for the pit. Somebody asked about covering the pit here the other day. Covering the pit and stout bearers, flooring boards, carriages, and pricelessly useful stuff. As the engraving shows, these concerts were held not in the concert room, which would be logical, but in the theatre itself, with the pit floored over. The stage was extensively dressed for the occasion, and it's likely that the first lot consisted of the drapery we can see in the background here. Later in the sale, we find lot 1 of the 9th day of the sale. This is the part that was held around the corner in the barn in James Street. Consists of 24 concert room wings. Now, there's no mechanism in the concert room to hold the scenery for the theatre, and there seems little doubt that these flats being described are the ones that make up the scenery behind the orchestra and the choir. The series of grand national concerts is in fact an under-researched venture that was started by Her Majesty's in the latter part of 1850. Despite the name, the programmes were not especially British and were consequently the subject of some negative comments. But they were certainly grand, and they seem to have been very popular. Turning at last to the chorus, we can see them working through different works: Beethoven's Fidelio, the Ballet of Esmeralda, and the ballroom scene from the end of Act 2 of the opera Don Giovanni. I think I'm not alone in having believed for many years that these engravings were decorated and populated by the engraver for aesthetic reasons unconnected with the performance. Such assumptions are rightfully shown here to be very dangerous. Reading through the sale lists of the costumes, we find that nearly every costume is listed at a minimum, and I mean a minimum, of a dozen per gender. In the listing for the men's wardrobe, we find 12 black coats, 27 pairs of Cossack trousers, 26 domino cloaks, 12 yeoman's cloaks, 12 pairs of breeches ditto, and so on. In the woman's wardrobe, we find 12 satin dresses, 12 satin and velvet bodices trimmed, tinsel and muslin skirts, 12 overskirts, and 12 pairs of sleeves. The list goes on and on. The function and organisation of the choruses of Majesties have been transformed, in fact, by the German opera season in 1832. The chief excellence in the performance of the German opera, both in the choruses and the band, is their perfect ensemble and effective nuance. The reception of the choruses by the German visitors transformed the way in which the London chorus sang, and they garnered excellent reviews during the following years and before their acting. But the surprise is this scene from Don Giovanni. The 19th century audience had a complicated relationship with the opera, even cutting off the last vaudeville in Act 2 as being an inappropriate ending. Here, the scene is presented as a colossal room with a large chorus, overdressed even for a court-style ball, quite the antithesis of the small dance scene with jumbled social classes found in the scene in Mozart's opera. Here, it's been transformed, perhaps unexpectedly, into a grand opera. It's also, in fact, the show that was on the night the theatre called Fire. We had this was mentioned, I think, by Vicky the other day. So, to conclude, and a salvation of sorts. As often with sales of theatrical items, the question is, what use could such items be outside the theatre for which they were designed? I mean, among the other things that were there were the gas thermometer, the gas things from the side of the stage, and so on. Everything, right down to the sort of door keys, is listed in this catalogue. Well, so the general answer is not much. Well, some of the items could be repurposed in other contexts. How much might a sale have been expected to raise? The cost of the fittings was calculated at around £23,000, of which only a fraction would be realised in such a mass sell-off, although it is not clear how many of the fittings were included in this calculation, and we only need £10,000 to was it clear that once sold, how the building will be adequately re-kitted out for the building's owners. Fortunately for the theatre, these questions did not arise, for the dispersal sale for which Scott prepared the catalogue never took place. Some days before the auction, the public were informed that the whole of the contents could be purchased as one lot. The whole of the valuable properties of Her Majesty's Theatre will be offered for sale by auction on the premises in the Haymarket on Monday 14th of March 1853 at 2 for 3 o'clock in one lot. And only then, if it failed to sell, would the contents be sold by auction in lots. But a buyer did come forward. The Earl of Dudley, who had had ambitions to run the theatre himself, stepped forward and together with Sir Ralph Howard purchased the contents. Dudley put a season together and things were far advanced by the time the creditors again intervened and the season collapsed. And this, plus the legal snares which restrained Lumley, ensured that the Opera House did not reopen until it was pressed into service after Covent Garden burnt down in 1856. Her Majesty's itself burnt in 1867. The fire broke out in the evening and there was no record of whether the two huge cast iron water tanks in the roof space were full of water. Scott's catalogue lists them as being each 36 feet long by 6 feet high and 6 feet wide. Nor does there seem to have been time to put into action the two Mullins fire engines noted in the carpenters' and painters' workshops. But it is clear from the auction catalogue that the fire, which occurred on a windy night, had plenty of fodder in the building, both stored in appropriate and inappropriate places, and which burned fiercely, destroying all but the inner walls and the colonnade. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Michael. I can't help to think, all that we've heard about theatres and fires, that actually Edwin Sachs, the great orator and writer and polymath, actually listed in his Who's Who as one of his interests as watching theatre fires. I think it was spectacle in its own right at the time. Anyway, enough of that. Our final speaker today, Jerome Maeckelbergh, whom I have met many times, mainly in Europe at conferences, and who has been a great exponent of the stage machinery, particularly at the Boiler in Antwerp. And many of you will know the story of the salvation of that building and how many times it's been under threat over the last 10, 15, goodness, maybe 20 years. John Earl and I first visited it in the very early 1980s, and the story continues to a certain extent. So, ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together for Jerome.
So to keep into my 20 minutes, I have to keep on my prepared text and avoid improvising, so here we go. The project Back to the Future of Heritage Theatre Technology was started in response to the renovation plans in 2013 of the Burla Theatre in Antwerp, including the removal of all heritage technology in its fly tower and understage. In 2014, as a result of an international conference held in Antwerp, Europa Nostra declared Burla's heritage theatre machinery as one of the 7 most endangered heritage sites in Europe. So a new international public tender was launched requiring all heritage machinery to remain on site. This tender was won by the group around the London-based DRDH architects. So, in a presentation during that conference, I showed the rigging of wing chariots in a closed circuit in the understage. This was supported by a demonstration in a 1:10 scale model. So you can add as many partly counter-eggs as needed for your set. There is no need to cover the whole stage with a counter-egg that in front then has to be almost 1 meter high. You could also slide the counter-egg platform to the side, make a scene change in the side wing and bring it up again. So, heritage theatre technology has many unexpected possibilities as it never has been used in the past. But the artistic director of the Toneelhuis argued that his own productions using this heritage could not travel to other performance spaces. So the project Back to the Future of Heritage Theatre Technology works on contemporary alternatives for this versatile but underestimated technology that can be used even on spaces without any theatrical accommodation at all. So we had our first workshop in Cardiff during the 5th anniversary celebration of Oistad in 2018. The workshop was accommodated in a classroom of 13 to 8 meters. The place of action containing a truss structure was restricted to 6 by 6 meters. So it was also the purpose to use a relatively cheap materials. The understage was built with the 12mm thick sheets and 18mm thick strips of MDF. And this brand of rails are 42, I don't have some sound there. Okay, well, we continue. So, trolleys sliding inside, pulleys will guide the ropes. And once the rigging is done, MDF sheets cover our understage, which is no more than 42mm deep, matching the height of the used rails. Place your wagons where needed, and you can move things on and off stage. So, from time to time, attendants of the Oistad anniversary came in to have a look and be informed of the activity. And some of them even stayed for longer to give a hand to the students. So after the workshop, the result was demonstrated in several public presentations. During this presentation, students came on stage to demonstrate how heritage technology can be used with an understage of 4 centimeters. So this is the system where we move on and off each wagon with wing chariots in the understage, each one separately. The restrictions by the shape of the location would give the impression this is a demonstration with a large-scale model, but all technology shown is full size. The students explain the used technology and rigging to the public. So, without start. Here you see the heritage cassette and core system up to now is only found and used in a multi-level understage. Introducing now a cassette and core system on stage and other non-historical use. So slide it into a wing chariot, moving up and down on a moving chariot, a projection screen manipulated by drum A, 2 wing chariots traveling simultaneously in opposite direction, manipulated by drum B. So, how to manage this without a historic understage? To demonstrate this with our 4 cm understage, the case and core system is mounted on a wagon, and the core slides into the cassette. The necessary pulleys are added. Again, no scale model here, we work in one-to-one conditions. But 2 persons needed, one for the horizontal move of the cassette and core system, and on and off stage, one to have a separate move with the core of the system going up and down. Main problem with this first workshop, I brought a bunch of necessary material with me to Cardiff in my car, a Citroën Berlingo, including the parts MDF sheets for alternative understage. My Berlingo was scarcely overloaded. But it survived the travel. But nevertheless, I should use a lighter weight material for next workshop occasions to spare my Berlingo. And that workshop was in May 2019 in Gothenburg, Sweden. So I found a lightweight plastic material with a honeycomb core structure in it, sheets from 28 mm thick, lightweight but not exactly cheap. With this height of new understage, we used the curtain rails and sliders which were kindly offered to this workshop project by Showtips. They are 30 mm wide and exact 28 mm high. But as this alternative understage floor was no more hollow with a trap closing it, the rigging had to be different. To be able to screw in the pulley, we have to reinforce the head of the honeycomb plastic with a piece of robust wood. So starting on one side of the wagon, you turn over 2 pulleys to the other side of your stage, where it turns back over a pulling system to end at the other side of your wagon, forming a closed circuit. So now we go to other technology. At the international conference in Antwerp in 2014, we showed unexpected possibilities controlling 2 combined movements with 1 drum. So normally you should hear my voice, but here there was a laughter of the public. So a counterweight balances the elevator with statue, and at the same time the elevator with statue is the counterweight to move the rotating stairs. We have to create a closed circuit moving around the drum to start the Buddha apparition. So instead of having a counterweight to balance with the elevator, we could use another elevator with a set element as a counterweight. That way we move 3 stage elements by using just 1 drum. But of course not every space has an understage. So we built a case with 3 balancing elevators for proving its workability of the system. This technology could also be used as a scenographic element on stage, but it's just to show how simple it works. So that is the theory. So now for the first time, students start to put the parts of the elevator system together, while other students are assembling a cassette and core system in the front, as you can see. The elevator system is built in front of the stage, and at the back on stage, students are preparing a low-budget flying system. So now we have the combined elevators explained by the students in Gothenburg, here again in silence. So sorry for that. I was also invited to show my alternatives for heritage stage technology on the stage set scenery show in Berlin in June 2019. Here, the elevator block has been put on rails so it could also move front and backwards. And the public was invited to manipulate themselves the ropes for the different technologies. Okay, that was my Berlingo, as you can see. Here we have the cassette and core system demonstrating during the workshop in Sevilla. Moving on and off with the wagon, as well as the movement up and down from the cassette and core system is with a rather jerky movement due to manipulators' actions pulling the ropes by hand. To have a smooth traveling, both movements should better be controlled by a drum. But let's have a look at another type of drum, the degrading drum. Historically, a degrading drum is only found above the grid in the fly tower. So at the conference in Antwerp, I propose to introduce it also in the understage by fixing drums of different diameters to transform an existing appeal drum into a degrading drum. The larger the diameter, the longer the travel distance on stage per rotation of the appeal drum. So, used in the understage, you could fix, for example, create a palette of moving masts. So imagine what you can do with this, with a backlight creating moving shadows to the front, or front footlight, throwing moving shadows on a backdrop. So still theoretical and needed to be proven that its workability to realize this for the first time. We borrowed a degrading drum from the 1:4 scale model that Chris van Gouten developed to demonstrate the historic use of his heritage machinery. We had to experiment with a few traffic pools on the moving platforms, but it is clear you can put any scene element on the wagons, moved by one student turning a degrading drum to move the 3 pairs of wagons in opposite direction, crossing the complete stage. So in Gothenburg we didn't use the degrading drum, but a few budget-friendly pulleys to manipulate the wagons using simultaneously on and off stage, crossing each other. For the Iberian tour, in which we had a planned workshop in Sevilla, Spain, and in Évora and Porto in Portugal, we used our first homemade degrading drum. We show the rigging around the degrading drum, where it should run around each degradation twice to have a better grip. So, after the rigging between the different wagons, where we use tensioners to lead the rope in the right direction to the drum and back to the next wagon. So that's for the rigging. So this tour started in March 2020 in Sevilla. Also set up in a relatively large classroom, it could give a scaled impression. Nevertheless, these alternatives are made in a real size that can be used in the largest theatre, as we will see later. So again, at the conference in Antwerp in 2014, we showed in the 1:10 scale model also a traveling turntable. It has been introduced for the first time at the workshop in Sevilla. The outline of the turntable has to be restricted to 1.68 meters to fit into my Berlingo. Divided in 2 parts, a movable wagon with a central hole in which a shaft can rotate by a support of self-made ball bearing system that drives the turntable. As the system is not completely finished here, as you can see, the rope that makes the turntable turning is not embedded in the rails from our understage. This workshop ended on Friday, 13 March 2020. Someone remembers that day? So the first severe COVID restrictions made me terminate prematurely this Iberian workshop tour. This is another possible use of a degrading drum. In Arenberg Theatre in Antwerp, they used the COVID restriction period to organize a workshop for their theatre technicians. So for the first time, we worked in real theatrical dimensions. We could also use their foldable platforms as a structure for the degrading drum exercise. And here we found out that while turning around the degrading drum, from time to time the coming rope was shifting over the leaving rope. And when that happened, it blocked the system. So we have to find a solution for that. So we still use the degrading drum as shown on the left, and the next workshop we will change the degrading drum system to the one you see on the right. That way can separate the coming rope from the leaving rope with this double structure of the drums. So the last workshop back on the program was in the Théâtre National for our French-speaking Belgian colleagues. Workshop and public presentation were held under the then still applicable COVID rules. The playing area this time was 16 meters wide. And also here we could use an amount of foldable platforms for the new degrading drum system. So at the end of the presentation, public was invited to come on stage to have a closer look to all alternatives. So we continue here, you see, well, later on public comes on stage when it's finished, but we skip that and go. So the last workshop, oh, you hear public is coming. So we made shapes in multiplex to guide the wagons on the rails and at the same time push the rope into its groove. So it's pity here you do not hear the sound, because you will hear this was a very crispy noise during the move, because this multiplex guides into the multiplex grooves made an unacceptable noise. So each workshop we learn more and more. So for the next workshop we have to change that guiding system. On a new block we will attach a bearing with a nylon wheel as a guide under the block and a strong eye screw in the front of it to attach the pulley or the pull rope. These guiding bearings will avoid annoying grinding sound during the movement of the wagons. So we put the largest drum in the middle of the alternative hemp house. You see here at the right. It will be used to control the movement. We also should introduce steel cables to be able to manipulate heavier loads and still keep the tension on the cables. So here the whole project was conceived to prove that this technology also can be used on a flat performance place. But in Bruges, again no sound here, the city theatre, we have to do the opposite, proving these alternatives can also be used on a historic theatre with raked stage floor, but having no more understage with heritage technology, which happens in a lot of historic theatres, as you probably know. thanks to this new guiding system consisting of a bearing with a horizontal wheel that absorbs the downward slip-off caused by gravity. So only just two examples here. This multifunctional building was inaugurated in 1840 and received soon the nickname the Coffee Grinder. Inside of it, theatre. Closed in 2013 for security reasons, it opened again in 2018. They decided to leave half of the heritage technology under the stage to realize an artist's dressing room in the other half of the understage. So above the dressing room you find still the costières that can be opened, so it's very possible to install here or alternative wing chariot system to be able to do scene changes as we have seen now and is covering the whole stage floor. So in this theatre in Portugal, a rather strange observation. When we take into account that it must have been designed in the late 1870s, it has a wing chariot system limited to the stage, to the side stages. But when we see the structure of the playing area in the stage floor, we see a structure of false streets where you also could embed our alternative wing chariot system, similar to the theatre space we have seen in Saint-Omer. So under the stage, for a contemporary performance, they have built a complicated structure to use the available traps in the stage floor for appearing and disappearing in the underground. So the wing chariots only usable in the side stages, and for their complicated appearance structure also here I would advise to use our alternative elevator system. So all these exercises have been done with rails parallel to the stage opening. This is much like the historic layout of the stage floor, but this is done to be able to demonstrate all the different possibilities for these alternatives for heritage theatre technology. You can of course put your floor, rails and drums just depending on the needs of your production. You have, for example, also triangle standard platforms. On these moving platforms, you could move on a regular scenery, but also mount a cassette and core system on it or install a traveling turntable on rails. So it's not because it are just square platforms moving in the slide now. So if you would be interested in any unexpected possibility in your theatre, feel free to contact me. So, I am 4 minutes over time already. I'm very sorry for that. But still, I have to thank the people who organized this meeting to be able to show these alternative possibilities, who are very budget friendly. So also thank you for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Jerome. Well, that kind of concludes things. I was going to suggest we do questions, but actually we're so far kind of over time, really, that if we don't get off now, we're not going to be at the hotel to get changed, to go and put our party frocks on for the dinner. So I think what we should do is either re-engage with these guys in the morning, in the early morning coffee, if that's all right, on a more one-to-one basis. If you've got something specific, then either grab them at the dinner tonight before they've had a snifter, and if not, grab them in the morning. And thank you very much to the panel this afternoon. Thank you for you. Pop home quickly. You might catch the telly and see what's been on, that's been recorded at lunchtime. And we'll hopefully see most of you this evening at the Royal Station Hotel. Bright and early, don't be late, because we've got a little bit of a music thing going on early doors. Okay, we'll see you all later.